I don't know, we're doing so much conditioning, we're working so hard. How come in the game we weren't showing that? How come in the game we were fatigued? Let me share with you the 3 biggest mistakes when it comes to basketball conditioning. And if you are making these mistakes, which a lot of people likely are, your basketball performance and you on the court are not going to be as good as you can possibly be. So listen up. Fixing these 3 mistakes is going to take your basketball performance to the next level. And it's going to make sure that the effort that you're putting in is actually going to transfer to the court rather than working really, really hard, but actually not having that transfer to your basketball skills and performance on the court. So listen up, because this is going to change the game for you. So here's the deal. When it comes to basketball conditioning, a lot of times I would say the intent is good, but the thing is the intent is not enough to transfer best to basketball skills. And this comes from sometimes, old school thinking and old school strategies that have been instilled through coaches, that have been instilled through what somebody has said, but it's not really what's working. So let's dive into mistake number 1. I actually used to believe this, or should I say use this too much, and that is using general conditioning to prepare for the sport, right? Meaning you're going for a regular run, you're going to, using airdyne bikes and things of that nature. And it's not that they don't have their place, but really important here is to use the sport. Okay, now here's why. Think about basketball, and when I'm running down the court, starting, stopping, lateral slides, there's so many different movement patterns, that tissues that get worked when you're playing basketball versus sitting on a bike and working. And yes, like we're working our VO2 max, but it is not the same. And so using sport as much as possible is very, very important. And another thing that's very important, especially when it comes to teams, is collaborating between the sport and physical prep coaches. So for an example, if I'm working with the basketball head coach, I want to know what they're doing and then connect to make sure that the conditioning is going to align with what we're doing inside of the gym. That's a very, very important aspect of it here, because we want to try to create a plan that uses basketball as the modality of conditioning. But here's what the thing is that leads us to number 2, and that is that basketball drills do not match sport needs. Now, I'll give you a very, very simple example of this one. Have you ever seen or heard or been through this by yourself, where mistakes are made on the court and then the team gets punished? They get ran to death. Now, here's the problem with that. When the team gets ran to death, now all of a sudden they're exhausted and they're out of how the sport is played. So now they're training different energy systems that they're actually going to be performing in the game, which means that the practice does not match how the game is going to be, right? And that's a lot of times they go like, I don't know, we're doing so much conditioning, we're working so hard. How come in the game we weren't showing that? How come in the game we were fatigued? In the 3rd and 4th quarter, we just started getting crushed. Well, because we did not match the sport's needs. So drills should contain work to rest ratios of the sport. They should mimic game situations, and it should incorporate game skills with the desired pace and the tempo. And we're going to go into what that looks like in basketball as we look at the statistics. Again, this is a very, very big point. I'm going to circle this one. I'm going to put an arrow to it. Okay. If the goal is to make the team the best possible, then doing consistent punishing drills to crush the team is actually going to make the team perform worse, right? So the desired goal that we want to get out of it by punishing them is not going to work. It's not going to be helpful. So let's look at work to rest ratios from basketball, okay? High, so there's a high and medium low aspect to this, okay? So high intensity here would be sprinting, defensive slides, shuffles, shooting, jumping, cutting, or battling on a post. If I'm on a post and I'm battling, or I'm just battling for position, that's pretty damn high intensity. If you've ever been in a basketball practice or game, you know how that feels like. The heart rate's going to skyrocket. Medium would be jogging, right? So we're just jogging down the court, maybe a little bit faster intensity than I just showed. And then low would be your walking and your stoppage time. Right now, here's where it gets interesting and how it relates to this part over here. This is the ratios of each one of these. So if one is high intensity, for every second of high intensity, there's 4 seconds of medium intensity and 5 seconds of low intensity. Now, when I said over here that we want the drills to contain work-to-rest ratio to sport and mimic game situations, if we are going at practice and not working this way, we're actually not preparing to be the most effective, the fastest possible, the most conditioned for that game, because we're just crushing them down to the ground. Okay, then imagine this one, right? Like, all right, we're missing shots. Everybody on the line, we're doing suicides, right? We're doing a lot of suicides. If somebody doesn't get under a minute, we're Dunsky, okay? But the thing is that what's happening there is that we're not actually training the energy systems of the game and transferring. So think about this. This is another thing that is important, going through studies of it. High intensity happens every 7 seconds, and acceleration happens every 14 seconds of the game, and then cool down is every 29 seconds, right? And this happens up to 50 times a game, and the average is 44, right? So now if we look at that and go like, okay, there's an acceleration, there's a high intensity play every 7 seconds, an acceleration every 14 seconds, and a rest every 29 seconds, and we do that 44 times per game. Now again, this is gonna vary. That's the average, because some teams are faster paced teams, some teams are slower paced teams, but it kind of gives us an idea. And also here, I wanted to show the ranges. High intensity happens 2% to 20% of the game. Again, depending on the team. Medium is 17 to 68% of the game, and low is 30 to 72% of the game. And average heart rate is 175 beats per minute, right? With the range being 155 to 189. And there we're looking at like 1 to 4 work to rest ratios. So again, this is all coming up just so that you can see like how these plays, or should I say, how we should practice the sport. Now I gave some examples here also of like when we go into 5-on-5 versus live play. So let's say there's a practice going on, we're doing 5-on-5. When we compare 5-on-5 versus live play in a game, the workloads in a game, in a live game, in a live play are 40% higher. That's dramatically higher workloads. That means sprint, stop, jump, all those different things. The heart rate is 10% higher, and the VO2 is 22% higher. So what is that telling us? It's telling us that usually 5-on-5 play does not mimic actual real live games, which means that we have to figure out a way to bridge the gap, okay? Because we have 1 to 8 seconds of high activity, 4 to 32 seconds of jogging, and again, so we have to create scenarios in practice that do that. Couple of ways that I love doing this is 3-on-3, right? If we do half court 3-on-3 play, we're gonna be able to increase that intensity and workload to mimic more of that live play than if we're doing 5-on-5 in practice. Also, things such as 3 to 5 dribble 1-on-1, right? Because now we have 3 to 5. It's a very intense play. 3 to 5 dribbles is going to take you somewhere between 5-8 seconds, 10 at most, and then the play is over, and then we have a recovery aspect to it that's going to match at least a 1 to 4 work to rest ratio before we do it again. Also, if we're doing, I would say, drills that are non-live drills, meaning not playing against somebody else, it could be something of the nature of having going full speed from half court, doing a drill where you cross over, I'm laying up, and then I'm slowly walking back to half court, right? So if we look at this 44 times a game idea, we could start building a conditioning program where, again, it could be a defensive shuffle all the way up to the three-point line, from there sprinting to half court, picking the ball up, going to the other side of the court, putting up a shot, so full speed putting up a shot. We're looking at like a 5-6 second play, and from there we're either jogging, right? We can jog for a little bit to have those 1-4-5 work to rest ratios, come back to the top, breathe, and we're going at it again, right? So those are just some, again, I could line out all these drills that you can do as an individual to mimic the intensities and the paces of the game using actual skills, meaning I'm doing basketball drills, I'm doing shooting drills, I'm doing ball handling drills that is going to carry over to the game. That's the second biggest mistake, is that it's not matching the sport's needs. So we have to understand the needs of the sport and then match those needs, and you're going to have such a better carryover inside of the game. Now, this brings us to, I would say, part number 3, not progressing, not intelligently progressing workloads. Some of the things that you see happen is that workloads are either too high or too low, and they're not progressed nicely and smoothly. The way the body adapts well is with progressive overload, right? Meaning, so if I did, we set an example of like 44 of those plays happen per game, but you wouldn't start building up to the season just doing 44 of those plays. You might start with 10, and the next week 12, and then 14, and 16, and 18, and so on and so forth, right? And here's the thing, when we talk about intelligently progressing overload, we can look at workload in 2 different ways. One is external, things like velocity, acceleration, distance. And an example would be, as I work with the professional rugby team, they have the technology like Catapult, GPS, that can track all of this stuff. How many miles did they run? What speeds did they run at? Acceleration, deceleration. Now, I would say a lot of high school teams, even college teams, don't have that. I would say don't have that data, don't have those the money to invest in that, which is okay, right? Because we can what we can look at here is, for instance, things like session duration, number of jumps, number of drills. So if we're doing drills, we can say, okay, well, last week we did this and this many jumps in this drill, we did this many drills here, and this was the duration of time, right? We can still intelligently progress it, even though we don't have all the technology that would help us out. If you do have the technology, great, but if you don't, again, this can be very, very helpful. And you program it so that your body and the team's, I would say, workload progresses in a nice, smooth way, and your body adapts. Now, the second part is internal, right? So external is all this data here, where internal can be things like heart rate. It can be HRV, or heart rate variability. Things like subjective questionnaires. How do you feel? RP, which we'll talk about in a second. What's great is that things like that are cheap, right? So wearing heart rate monitors during practice can give us so much information, right? Which heart rate zones were you in, right? Last week, hey, were you in a green zone, but this week you're in a red zone because you're not sleeping well enough. You know, the workload's built up and you're very, very tired. There needs to be more break. So being able to look at things like this are beneficial. If the players for a whole week say that, you know, their recovery is a 3 out of 10, but before that it was 7, 8, we can look at that and go like, okay, something's going on, we need to back off. And again, RPE is just your rate of perceived exertion, which can still be a good marker for players when they mark it down, and we say, okay, what's the RP, and then what's the duration of the practices, right? So that's an internal kind of workload marker. If we look at that, even if we don't have, I would say, crazy amounts of money to spend or anything like that, these are cheap alternatives, low investment alternatives that can still give us data to say, hey, we are progressing these athletes over time on building that workload. Because the problem is not large workloads over time, meaning, so let's say I have a 3 to 4 month period leading up into preseason, and we're just building those workloads up little by little, week by week, and the body's adapting nicely. That's not going to be a problem. That's actually how we build conditioning. It's also how we build strength and power and all those things that we'll talk about another time. The problem becomes spikes in the short term. That can be an issue. So all of a sudden, and I'll give you an actual example here, where if the team is not doing well and all of a sudden there's punishment, and all of a sudden the training is like, we're now doing 2-a-days, we're bumping up the volume. Instead of an hour and a half, it's going to be 2+ hours. We're going to do finishers, we're going to do all these. What happened in this scenario is that workload spiked dramatically. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys a statistic here that's pretty mind-blowing. There's a statistic, they use it a lot in NBA and college basketball, where you're looking at the 28-day average, and then you're comparing the 7-day average to it. And there's a ratio to this, right? So you look at the previous month of training and the workload of that month, and then you look at the 7 days to compare it to it, okay? Anytime we're looking at a 1.5, so if it's a 1.5 ratio, it means you're doing 1.5 times the workload. You're looking at 2 to 4x possibility of injury the following week, right? That's humongous, right? Because if we spike the workload and you're not actually tracking it and having some system for it, you could fall in trouble by getting, again, you could increase the risk of injury for players 2 to 4x the following week. We want to keep it at a 0.85 to 135 And again, why not lower than 0.85? Okay, because equally problematic can be low workloads. That means that players are not training, right? They're not working, and then all of a sudden going into a game and having, playing 40 minutes at super high intensities, we can see the same issues happen. Having a plan and a path, I always say, when you don't have a plan or a path, the default is going to be struggle. The default is going to be doing things the way that you have been and getting the results that you have. And if you don't like the results, you got to change stuff up. These are 3 of the biggest mistakes that I see in basketball conditioning, and hopefully some strategies that you can apply into your own training to improve them. Now, if you loved this presentation, then click the button below and subscribe, because we're going to have a lot more content like this to help you become a better athlete, to help you become a better basketball player, and take your game to the next level.